I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda for this evening is approval of the agenda. Any comments or concerns on the agenda for this evening? No? All in favor? Raise your hands, please. Any opposed? Seeing none, so approved. Thank you. Next is call for notices of motion or reports to the board. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the minutes of the March 6, 2018 meeting. Any questions or comments on those minutes? No, seeing none, a show of hands for all approved. A show of hands for those opposed. Thank you, so carried. And moving on then to 3.2, budget. I'll turn that over to Mark, as he will have the most up-to-date information from the ministry on that.
Thank you. You know that we put aside time for budget in our April meetings, and there's been lots of public things you've seen through the press in the last while, some of which I covered in my superintendent's report. Our intention of our time in our meetings, though, is for us to talk about potential budget for our board, what that might look like. And so we'll talk about the provincial pieces in a moment. So talking just specifically about our board's budget, we do our planning based, number one, first on enrollment projections, because we know that that's the vast bulk of our funding is our per pupil enrollment allocation. And I believe our projection is about a 0.5% growth increase is what we're projecting for next year. So I'm sure you can appreciate that that's not much, and that our costs for operating the board, there is a regular increase that we see, partly due to increases in contracts, increases in utility costs, resource costs, etc. So those kinds of things can eat up a 0.5% growth pretty easily in enrollment and in funding. So senior staff has been working through our budget right now, basing it on a zero-based budget, meaning we are not anticipating getting enough funding to do any kinds of increases in funding, nor are we anticipating any decreases. So when Denise and Jason and I were talking about this coming into April, we said, well, compared to our previous few years of our budget work, all of those conversations have been on reductions, right? Because we knew we were working through our 4-year reduction in funding that we had to work through. So that's passed, and so there are no reductions. That's the good news. The other side of that coin, though, is that there are no increases. So we're talking about a status quo budget, and that's not just in special education, that's across the board, that there will be few, if any, changes in any areas of our operation, whether they be special education, teachers in classrooms, resources, utilities, IT, you name it. We're basically status quo. So that's our budget, our student per pupil funding budget going forward. So in terms of our discussions here in the past, here at SEAC, we've brought to you recommendations recommendations from staff, from student services staff, saying these are the things that we're considering for the budget. The last couple of years, it's been cuts, as you know. We've come here saying, here are the things that we are recommending to be cut because of our reduction in funding. And when I first started, I think in my first year, we were talking about additions, and we brought you some of those. But as a department, we haven't been talking about either, because that's been our decision as a senior team. There will be no adds and no reductions. We're working on that zero-based budget. If, as we work through our budget process, and I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment, as we work through that process, there are some funds at the end of that process, and we say, okay, here's $500,000 or $1 million or whatever that looks like, that might be spent on whatever positions or initiatives or those kinds of things, then we have that conversation. But those are come at the end of the process, because we have to do all of our other calculations first. So we could talk about if there are some suggestions here tonight, but I'm not coming with a staff list of reductions or additions, because we haven't generated any, because it's because it's a zero-based budget this year. So so that's where we stand. Like, if this is, I guess we're taking a different approach because we have no recommendations as a staff, because there are no changes this year. So if you'd like to certainly ask questions, but if you also would like to make any suggestions, you're welcome to. Just a little bit about our budget process. So as a senior team, almost every week, well, not every week, every couple weeks through the winter into the spring, Lucy Veerman, our superintendent of student service or business services, and some of members of her team come to admin council and working with projections, because that's the number one piece that we work with first, working with our student enrollment projections, start working with us, showing us, okay, so what will our needs be? And we know that our staffing is about 85% of our budget. So start with that conversation and talk about enrollment projections, how many teachers we're going to need, how many administrators, how many all the other staff, and say, okay, so this is what that looks like. How much will it cost? Do we agree on this? Yes, no, changes, etc., and move that along. And then we get into, like I said, utilities, IT costs, facilities costs, etc. All those we work through each every few weeks and sort of chip through another part of our budget and say, yes, do we agree to these things, etc. And that's all that works through, and we finally get to, is there anything left? And sometimes we can project that there's going to be something left because of growth, but this year we're saying we can't count on there being anything at the end of that process because we have so little growth this year. Does that make sense? So that's where we're still working through the iterations of that process. Lucy did a presentation to trustees last week, a budget workshop in committee of the whole, and I will send you those PowerPoints. There's 2 PowerPoints that I'll share with you that she created for trustees. But you can, and you'll see through that there are, we're not counting on any extra funds. If there is, say, $1 million, which may sound like a lot, but keep in mind that our budget's about $700 million. So that's point whatever of a percent. So that amount up or down, we don't plan on big spending because it can be gobbled up pretty quickly by a small calculation one way or another. So we have to be pretty careful with that. So that's where we sit with the budget this year. So there are no staff recommendations coming forward tonight. But I'd certainly take questions, or if you have, if you want to pose suggestions, if we get to the end and there are some dollars, if there are some things that you'd like us to consider, I'd be happy to hear that tonight as well.
Okay, Amy is first on our speakers list.
Thank you. Through you to the Superintendent of Student Services. So the Ad Act says that SEAC is supposed to have an advisory or an, not advisory, but they're supposed to be consulted on the budget. I understand we're talking about a zero-sum game, but that doesn't mean that SEAC might not want something spent in a certain area or two. And so my request would be that we are actually including SEAC in the budget discussions when they happen at the trustee table, because we do normally invite SEAC to participate in committee of the whole discussions of the budget. Whether or not at the end of the day we have any money to use doesn't mean that there isn't input that SEAC wouldn't want to give, and I wouldn't want them to not have that opportunity.
I'll respond. So, yes, I guess this is here tonight because we want SEAC's input. Could it happen at committee of the whole as well? Definitely. That's definitely an option. Our intent here is to hear ideas, concerns, suggestions that we can take forward. In our conversations, Denise, Jason, and I, in sort of preparing for it tonight, we thought we don't want to, get people's hopes up that maybe there's money for this, and at the same time, bring a balanced perspective to the conversation. So, input now for sure. We'd like to hear opportunity to come and listen or provide input at committee of the whole as well, for sure. So however that wants to, people want to provide, that would be great.
Thank you. And for anyone viewing this recording live or later, due to my error, that should have been showing Amy Collard on camera rather than Diane. So my mistake there.
We fixed it.
Oh, we did?
We fixed it.
Oh,
Good.
thank you, kind stranger. So now it's over to Diane, and I'll be very careful what I do next here.
A couple of points, Mark. First, I'd like to support what Amy said, and second, because Superintendent Veerman has come to SEAC and done, and not at a SEAC meeting, but offered us extra workshops. So she has conducted budget workshops with us in the past, and that would be they were most helpful. But my main point is, if there's no increase, how are they accounting for the huge influx in Milton?
Great question. Well, so it's about a 0.5. I don't know the exact, all the other decimals, but it's about a 0.5% increase is what's projected. So some increase, small, but some. So for sure, the growth that you see in Milton would be part of that, but we do have decline in other areas. Burlington for sure. That's why the PAR decisions in the spring. So there's a balancing of both. The projections, if you want to see, I can share with you the projected numbers across all schools, because we see all those, and they are certainly ups and downs. Milton, lots of growth, but declines elsewhere.
Thank you, Diane. And just like to recognize Chair Grubench and Trustee Gray attending. Thank you very much for being here this evening. And our next speaker is Sherry Foster.
Thanks, Jason. So it was spring of 2016 when this sort of came to a head, where, we sort of heard about all of these cuts and how they're going to affect special education. I think before that, we were lucky in that most of the cuts were absorbed in other areas. And so it was 2 years ago that this came to a head with us. And that's when we heard about canceling of the Learning Center and losing some of our itinerant teachers and some other things. So At that time, we talked a lot about, rather than just cutting things, how can we deliver services in a different way that is more cost effective? So rather than losing things, doing things differently, and we'd asked to be involved in that. And what came out of that was a recommendation to do a review of our special education programs. And the recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that we were going to hire an outside consultant to do that. So we did that. We hired an outside consultant. But to my knowledge, we did not come up in 2 years with any recommendations on how we could deliver services to our students in a more effective way. And the last presentation that I saw was a review of special education processes with regards to identification, early identification, and things like that. But there was nothing that I saw that would help us continue to deliver services, maybe even bring back some of the services that we had and deliver programs in a different way. So my feeling, and I'm not sure this, well, I'm going to finish it with a question, but I think the preamble is important, that in 2 years, we've been talking about this. I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars we've spent on a consultant that has not delivered anything, in my opinion, that it was originally designed to deliver. I think the scope changed at some point. And so we've had 2 years to think about this. And so now what I'm hearing tonight is that we have a flat budget. We have no recommendations. So I'm really disappointed that there are no recommendations. We are still looking at a budget that is less than what it was. And how can we have come for 2 years and not have any recommendations on how we can deliver services differently? When that's what we said we were going to do 2 years ago. So where are we with that? And what is the plan to actually deliver something on that? Very, very frustrated.
Thanks, Jerry. Very fair question. And so you're right that's how we started that was the impetus for the review initially. And so as we worked through that with our consultant in the first year, it became apparent that was pretty challenging to do in terms of analyzing the cost. And this is maybe a little bit different than what you're asking, so I will get to your question. But part of the review at that point was to ask ourselves, how much does it cost to run a certain program or to provide a certain service? And the reviewers, they started that work and said, this is pretty challenging. We're not sure if this can be done. And in the end, we ran out of time. So in terms of the work that they were doing, because we gave them a deadline of the end of February to have their work done, partly because we wanted to see if there was any recommendations that came out that affected staffing. We had to know by then for our staffing processes. So they weren't able to do it at that time. So then when we started phase 2 of the review this year, we included a cost question or analysis request in there for the reviewer. If you recall, we had a change in reviewer for the second year. And so she dug into that. Well, I should say she began to dig into it, but what became pretty clear, because she spent quite a bit of time with our business services staff, really trying to analyze those same questions. How much do things cost to do things? And what became pretty clear is we don't collect the data that is necessary to determine that. So as an organization, there are many, many things that we do and collect all kinds of data, but what we don't collect is the data that would determine, if, for example, if you provide a certain service to a student, how do you break down that cost? What portion of that school bus does that student use, if you want to use it that way, per year? What portion of that staff member's time goes to that student each year? What portion of those resources that we don't track in a staff member's weekly schedule how much time they spend on different exceptionalities. We don't track how much of that school bus goes to students of that exceptionality, et cetera. So as we tried to do that, we realized we couldn't do that accurately and therefore report back to say, here's what this program or service costs. So for us to do that, and then this may be different than the efficiency question you're asking. So in order to do that, we're going to have to make the decision that we're going to track those things and do that over a period of time, whether that be a year or whichever, to then be able to say, okay, so this is what this costs. So that became quite clear as we were doing the math and trying to figure those things out. Your question, I believe, is one around efficiencies. Is there a way that we can do something in a more cost-effective way and then use those found dollars to provide different programs and services? Is that fair to say? So that wasn't the focus and won't be the outcome of the review. But I'll say that we do that quite regularly within our department and more broadly in the system. Quite regularly ask the question, is this the best way to do this? Is there a more cost-effective way to do this? Do we need to do this at all? Is this a service that still needs to be provided? Those kinds of questions we're constantly asking ourselves, and then depending on the outcome of that, redirecting resources in different ways to help pay for other things. So that kind of thing goes on. Maybe not to the same scale that you're asking, or maybe not in the same formal way that you're thinking, but we are asking ourselves those questions all the time. So it's not a formal outcome of the review, but it is questions and work that we constantly do. So I'm not sure if that's fully what you're asking or hoping for.
I don't think it really answers my question. I think what I'm asking for is, I'm really disappointed that Special Education Review didn't deliver anything that we asked it to. But that aside, it's been 2 years where we've been talking about the budget has been decreased. How can we deliver services differently rather than cutting them? So has staff come up with any ideas? How are we going to get those itinerant teachers back? How are we going to deliver learning center services? How are we going, in 2 years, have we come up with any ideas to continue to deliver services or bring back services that were cut in a way that's different, or change something else so we can get those back? But when you say there's no recommendations, I wonder, did we just cut and say, okay, that's it, we're moving on, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, or is there really any thought about how we're going to do things differently? Because I don't see it, right? I don't see it.
Okay. So we're delivering service differently in a number of ways since those cuts happened. So we brought a report here and to trustees about how we're serving students with learning disabilities that aren't, may in the past have been attending the learning centers, but are being supported in their home schools. So we brought a report about what the request was about students who are on the wait list and how they're being served and how they're doing in terms of their performance in a number of areas, and we reported back on that. And our response back at the time when we talked about discontinuing the learning centers was about growing the capacity of staff to be able to support those students in their home schools, as opposed to them leaving their home school and their community to go elsewhere, that we could serve them well in their home school. So a lot of professional development has occurred and is continuing to occur because we've really focused on professional development for our staff in serving students with learning disabilities. So that, we've talked here about the renewed math strategy and what that work has looked like, because it's really focused on supporting students with LD. We've talked about the changes and training that have been going on with our IEPs. That work has been reported on here as well. So there are a number of areas where we're doing that work. And then we've talked, and some of the other changes that happened. We talked about some reductions in IRTs that happened. I think back in the first year of cuts, and how we're supporting the learning of staff, because the role of the IRT was being in the school, working alongside teachers, coaching, modeling, etc. So we've talked about how we're doing that still with some other stuff. We still have some IRTs in the system, but also that our IPLs, instructional program leaders, are doing some of that work, and that we're also growing the capacity of our certs so that they can do some of that work as well. They have been, but this is to further their skills in coaching, modeling, supporting classroom teachers through the certs as well. So there's a lot of other examples we could give, but those kinds of things where if it's not, the service isn't coming from that specific individual that that position doesn't exist anymore through the budget cut, how else are we serving? So those kinds of things we've been focused on all the way along, because in the end, we still see we know our role as a department is supporting schools, right? That our 200 staff, we aren't the number one supporters and servers of those 10,000 students with IEPs. It's the classroom team that does that, right? So our focus, our role is supporting that classroom team in providing great support to kids. So we've continued with that focus along the way. If there's more that we can share more details of the kinds of things that we've done, but that's that kind of support. Sure.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. I'm on the list next, and then we'll go over to Diane. I have a question about the terminology being used here. In accounting, zero-based budgeting means that you're starting off with a blank piece of paper, and you have to come up with a justifiable reason or business case for every dollar added to that sheet. So true zero-based budgeting means you're starting off every year with zero money and having to justify everything you're asking to spend. I don't think that's the case here, unless you're using the terms differently, but I don't see how you can be doing zero-based budgeting but not know the cost of anything. That just doesn't make sense. And this is part of, again, what Sherry was leading to, that 2 years ago we've ran into the same set of questions. Is how do you not know what it costs to deliver the services when you have to prepare a budget every year? And I struggle as well that we don't seem to be getting any closer to anywhere near an answer on that, because I've had budget level experience running an IT department years ago in not-for-profit, but it wasn't externally funded. You had to justify every dollar that was being spent because you had to go out and earn it. I realize you don't have to earn it in the sense it's driven primarily by student population, but you still need somehow to explain where the money is going to somebody, right? Otherwise, it could be, 3 teachers in a warehouse full of gold bullion, and that's just not, how things should operate, right? So I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, Mark, but I am concerned that we just keep hitting this same loop, and it's been going on longer than 2 years. We never really can get an idea of what it costs to deliver some of these services and if it could be done better. So I'll leave you to comment on that, and if you have no comment, I'll turn it over to Diane.
So if that's the definition of zero-based budgeting, I guess maybe that's a fair comment that it's a misnomer in this case, because our approach is no, I guess a no change, if that's more accurate. No increase, no decrease. That we're not in a situation where we have to do either. So then your question about our knowing the cost of things, we can tell you where every dollar is being spent. That's not an issue. But the actual cost of a certain program or service, that is more challenging, and it'd be it's a choice for us as an organization to say, okay, we are going to start to track that, knowing that doing that kind of thing, the tracking, the costing, the analysis will all take staff time to do that. So, it's a decision on our part to say we're going to ask staff to start to track and do that in whatever area of work or service that we provide, and then to use that information. So those are conversations that we're having about whether to do that or not, knowing that staff only have so much time in their workday, and if they're spending their time saying, I spent this much time with a student with this exceptionality today, or I spent this much time. If they're going to track that, we're going to set up mechanisms for them to do that and do that type of tracking. That's a choice we're making in terms of how they spend their time through the day. So we may do that because we think there is value in knowing is there bang for the buck, right, in terms of what we're doing. But to just say we should just start gathering that information, we know there's if you want to say, a cost to that too, right, to how staff spend their time. So if that's fair.
I understand, and I'm not expecting some sort of Taylorist work plan analysis where everything's, like a Ford assembly line down to, portions of a minute on how long it takes to put on a headlight. I'm looking at it, there's got to be something in between. That's all I'm saying, between we spend everything we got and, the school year is over versus, it's costing us $12.6 per second for this particular student on a Tuesday afternoon. There's got to be a middle ground. Anyway, that's where I was going with that. I'll turn it over to you, Diane, please.
When LDA Halton asked for the special ed review and supported the special ed review, our question was, what are we doing now that's working, and how do we know it's working? Or isn't working, and how do we know it isn't working? And it has nothing to do with dollars and cents. It has to do with student growth. Are they making gains? And that's the answer we want. What are we doing now that's helping our students to move forward and make gains? And if they're not making gains, then what we're doing is not working. And we need to take a look at why isn't it working and what can we do to make it work. Or we get rid of that and put in something that is going to work for them. And I know our students with learning disabilities, especially our students with a phonological awareness deficit, are not having their needs met now. And I hear that day in and day out from parents.
So is there a question you want me to respond to, or do you want me to comment on your?
My question is, have we answered the question? What are we doing now that's working, and how do we know it's working? What are we doing that's not working, and why isn't it working, and what are we going to do about it? I mean, usually when something's not working, you get rid of it, and you put in something that does work.
So I'll answer this in two parts. One is that when we engaged in the review, we started saying we need to know where our baseline is. And that was a lot of what we gathered in the first year, understanding who our students are. Our reviewers look carefully at our enrollment data, our identification information, all the kinds of things. They really think if you go back and look back at the report that came from that first stage of the review. We had a really clear understanding of who our students are, and we talked about the need for that baseline information to start. That included performance data, right? We had a pretty clear breakdown of how our students are doing based on their exceptionalities, and that's where from there we talked a lot about our performance gap, right, which is identified in our multi-year plan, in our operational plan, that there's that gap between how students without an IEP are performing and students with an IEP. And there is a pronounced gap across exceptionalities, across subject areas, across grades. That gap exists. Also, and I brought this earlier here to SEAC this year, I brought you a bit of an update on how we're doing. This was shared with trustees as well, that shows that we are closing that gap. We are seeing that the distance between those two performance lines is decreasing. And I would point to a number of things that we're doing. You've been involved in the Renewed Math Strategy as one example. Because this is not a single initiative or event that will close that gap, right? There are many, many things, a multi-pronged approach that we must take to close that gap. So we could spend another night going through all the initiatives that we have that are supporting students and staff in closing of that gap, because there are lots, many, many that we're doing. The Renewed Math Strategy is one of those. So we're closing the gap due to many things. In terms of the review, that was some of the review's role was to give us that baseline and then to help point us in how we're doing on an ongoing basis. Some of the information that was gathered this time in the review points to some of that information again. We know we focused on 3 exceptionalities in this stage of the review. And looks at where our strengths are and where you see areas for improvement. What we're going to talk about when we get to the item, whichever it is, I can't see because of the table there, but when we get to the discussing the recommendations from the review tonight, we're going to dig into those because I think there's some great recommendations there that will help us focus on those 3 groups of students, but also all students within the system will benefit from that. So some of that's originating from the review. And then maybe back to my response to Sherry is that there are things that we do every day to look at what's working and what's not. That happens at the system level, at a very high level. For example, Jane's been leading an IEP review for the last couple of years, really digging into our IEPs and looking at who's involved in the development. Is the content really relevant to that student? Really focusing on on understanding student profile, writing really good learning goals, etc. That kind of system level learning and dissemination into the whole system. We do that, and then all the way down to the classroom, where every day the classroom teacher is looking at what's working, what's not, how do we improve this. So again, we could look at many, many examples of the things that we're doing as a system. Did the review produce the specifics that you might have liked to see about change this program, do this differently, that kind of thing? No, it didn't. And we talked about that quite a bit in the steering committee. We said, what do we need to be able to assess the efficacy of a program or service? And from that, we said, well, first off, we need the baseline information. You can't say whether or not the student has experienced growth or our group of students have experienced growth or not if you don't know where they started from, right? So we know we needed baseline information. Then to look at how effective that program is, we then talked about, okay, so effective compared to what? because there's a difficult piece there around assessing, is the growth experienced by that student because of this specific program or service, or is that due to their developmental growth that would occur, just from their own, age and maturity, or, or is it the service itself? And those are things that we'd have to dig into pretty deep to understand. We looked at some of the review work done in other boards. And so, for example, Alana, our reviewer, she used to work for the Peel Board. They did a review of their programming services for students with giftedness. Took them 2 full years with 3 staff in their department focused on it. Some pretty deep work. So for us to really look at that, not that per se, but any real program efficacy is going to require some pretty in-depth commitment on the part of the board to do that. So from that formal review standpoint.
Yes, Mark, you're looking at it from the board perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it from the child perspective.
Yeah.
And I just want to see gains in the child. Each and every individual child, I want to see a gain day in and day out. I don't want to see them go home with less than what they came to school with. And many of our students are. And I have to admit, I'm very much like Director Miller. I only hear the bad news.
Yeah.
I don't hear the good stories.
Yeah. So we want the same thing, growth every day for every student. I agree there are some students that we could do better for. And I would say there are many students that we're doing great supports for. So and the gains by those, the students who are doing really well don't cancel out the others, right? I don't mean to imply that at all. That for the students for whom are still in need of more support, better programs, better services, that needs to be our focus every day, and it is.
Not necessarily more supports or better supports. It's the right support at the right time for that child.
I agree. Yeah.
Next is Amy. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just a bit of background on the start of the review 2 years ago. When we learned that the learning centers were going to be discontinued, at that same time, we also learned that we hadn't collected data for the duration of the learning centers, and we didn't know whether or not they had been efficacious in their delivery. And that was one of the reasons why we decided that as a SEAC, we wanted to see a review. Now we're talking about the budget, not the review. And so I was wondering if, since this is a nothing to be gained, nothing to be lost budget, are we suggesting then that the review ought to continue? And if we are, would there be a different focus? And is that something you've already considered?
Thanks, Amy. So we have certainly been talking about this. I'd say initially, because in fairness, the report and recommendations just came out a few weeks ago. So I think in fairness, we need some digestion time, if that's a fair word, and some of which we're doing tonight. We have plans for us to break into groups at the back tables and do some of that digesting tonight. So we're considering where to go next, and whether a continuation or not is appropriate, warranted, feasible, all those things. It is under consideration.
Okay. Anyone else? Then we will move on to the next item, which segues nicely to 3.3, special education review, breakout discussions, and who is...
Maybe you've heard enough from me for a bit. Denise can...
So I'll turn it over to my...
So I know that you have received the report, and what we wanted to do was to get some feedback and take some time to look at these recommendations. So the best way we thought to handle that was we're going to spread this over 2 meetings between April and May. And what we really want you to do, we're going to take the first 4 recommendations and focus on them tonight. And what we're asking you to give input in, at the back, there's 4 different tables, one with each for each recommendation. What we want you to think about as you split into your groups, and you're going to move around the table, so you're going to get a chance to give input on each of the 4 recommendations. What we want you to do is, the first question is, what do you see as the benefits of this recommendation? So how do you see that we are going, what is the good that's going to come out of it in terms of for the students, perhaps for staff? But again, I think the focus should be on the good that's going to come out of it for the students. The second one, if the decision is made to go forward on that recommendation, what are some of the things you would like staff to consider as they're implementing? So what are some of the things that you want them to make sure happens? What are some of the things that really are important to be involved in the implementation plan? So when they start planning how they're going to implement that recommendation, we want to make sure that it's inclusive, that no student is left behind in terms of that recommendation, that we've made sure that the change management piece is done effectively. So what we want you to do is to think about what are some of those things that come to mind that you want to make sure staff keep in mind when they're implementing. And the third place is any questions or concerns you might have about that particular recommendation. So keep in mind, each of these 3 areas is about that particular recommendation, because we want to focus on the recommendations, because that's really where we're going forward. We had a lot of discussion about the data collection, and we know that there are potential issues with it, that it is kind of a limited sample set, but the recommendations that came out of it, I think, are very general and broad and can be applied across the board. So really what we're looking for from you is to get your input on how do these recommendations get implemented? If you have any questions or concerns about a particular recommendation, maybe you think the way that it's worded or the way whatever it should be changed, or maybe you're not quite understanding some of the underlying things. So the other thing, in the process improvement world, we call it unintended consequences. So I want you to think about that too. So if we were to implement this particular recommendation, what could be an unintended consequence of that happening, right? So for example, if I implement an online form and I say you're not going to get any other forms, well, you're not going to get paper forms, my unintended consequence is that anyone who's not online is now not able to access that. So we need to think outside of that kind of box to be able to make sure we take everything into consideration. So what we'd like you to do is to split yourselves. Again, it's recommendations 1 to 4. They are at the back tables. To sit down and we'll probably do about 10 minutes per recommendation. If you're getting done sooner than that, we'll rotate you so that you can rotate through each of the recommendations and just be able to give us a little bit of input. This will also give you a chance to read what the other groups have put there and add on to that. Did I cover everything?
Wonderfully. So on the tables, there's 4 copies of the first 4 recommendations, 1 to 4. We've saved 5 to 8 for next month. So, but knowing that, table number 1, recommendation number 1 is at the table at the left, working across to 4. So even though you have all the recommendations at that table, you're reading through recommendation number 1. That's where your focus is. That's where your discussion is, and that's where your responses are at the table. Recommendation 2, et cetera. So that's what you're reading and discussing as you work your way across. In the past, when we've done these breakout groups, we've invited everyone in the room to participate. So if you're members, we'd love to have your input, staff, whoever else. We've welcomed everyone to be a part of the discussions and join in. So please feel free to welcome us. And a word of caution, those pages are not very absorbent. So when you go and do something with your marker and then quickly rub your hand across, it doesn't dry very quickly. So if you don't want to get marker or whatever on your clothing, I just suggest you be careful. Yeah, be careful for a wet marker ink. So, and so if you could, well, I guess it doesn't really matter how we group ourselves, but I think we're looking at about 3 to 4 people per table across the back. And that's the way we go. We read the recommendation, dig into the questions there, and we'll just work our way across, rotating about every 10 minutes. Fair enough?
So if we could all move to the back, the clock on the wall there says, what, 7:52? Plus 45 minutes from then, we'll be back in our seats. All right, well, thank you very much for participating in that exercise, everyone. I hope you all found it enjoyable. We will be at our next meeting doing the other recommendations, so please make sure you've read about them beforehand. Given that we have no new information on the budget, I think we'll be canceling our second meeting this month, unless we want to talk about no changes for a couple of hours. Any concerns about canceling that meeting? The
April 17th.
April 17th.
Yeah.
Okay. Canceled. Moving on then to 4 questions from the public. I don't believe we have any, but I do remind anyone who is viewing this live or watching this later, we do take questions by email, directed please to Lorna Goodnow, which is GOODNOWL@hdsbc.ca.
It's ROW.
Sorry? Didn't I say that? No. Oh, Goodrow, GOODROWL @hdsb.ca. Next, SEAC discussion and question period. So the speaker list is now open. Go ahead, please, Diane.
Yes, question for Mark. Where are we as far as making decisions about what we're going to do with the phenomenal number of kids that are on unidentified IEPs? What are we going to do about that list?
Thanks for that question. This is one that we, at our last sort of final meeting of the steering committee from the review, sort of did a bit of a brainstorm of things that we thought, if there is a next stage of the review, what might that stage focus on? And generated a few ideas, but I think the first one that came out of anyone's mouth was, should we be digging into that group, understanding who those students are, profiles, reasons why parents are choosing not to identify, what the impacts might be, those kinds of things. So that was generated pretty quickly by the steering committee as a possible next step. So if there's continuation of the review, I'm not saying that for sure that would be the only focus or captured, but was certainly brought forward by the steering committee. And then I also would say that if we don't go into a third stage of the review, that we won't be going there. I think we still need to dig in to better understand who that group of students are. So review or not, it's certainly identified as a place we need to go.
Just further to that, Mark, are we understanding that they're not going forward to an IPRC for identification because the school isn't suggesting that or offering it that to them? Not necessarily that the parents are refusing it, or is it being offered? Because we have an awful lot of parents that don't know that could be a next step.
Right. So lots of questions about why aren't they being identified. Yep.
Thank you, Diane. Next is Denise Nessev.
So I was going to wait till the superintendent's report, but I'm not going to. So I've seen the plans for the Nelson build out, and I am very, very, very disappointed. Given that today is the schools are celebrating World Autism Day, and it's all about inclusion, and it's all about making sure our students are together. This plan does not do that. So having a library on the second floor where our CPP students or any student with an accessibility is not able to access it. Having our CPP students in one corner of the classroom very far away from the track, and then having an outdoor education pen that reminds me of a kindy pen doesn't encourage inclusion. I'm not sure who was consulted, I know that we were not, on the building of this plan, but we were made promises throughout this entire PAR process that these students would have better. This is not better. This is setting them backwards. You are increasing the stigmatism of saying to the CPP students, we're going to put you in the corner of the school and you're going to have your own little outdoor area just like a kindy does, and we're not going to bring you into the heart of the school. That's what this message sends to many of the parents at Bateman that I have spoken to. And I'm really, truly disappointed. I had very high hopes for a building that would be inclusive, that would take the environment that currently exists at Bateman and bring it over to Nelson, where every student can be themselves regardless of what area they are learning in. And I don't think that this plan does that. I have some serious concerns about the fact the library is on the second floor, and so is all the computer labs. I have some serious concerns about the fact that the CPP kids are over in one corner that is so far away from the rest of the school that how are they going to be integrated with the rest of the school? We know from Autism Ontario, Down syndrome will tell you, integrating these students and part of the school is integral to their learning and their development, and this plan just doesn't do it. I wish it had come here first. In fact, one of the things we keep getting told is SEAC is really important as an advisory committee, yet this did not come here, and it's being presented to parents at Bateman on Thursday night, and many of them feel this is a done deal. If this is a done deal, I can tell you from personal experience, I will not send my child to the school. He is not going to get what he needs, and I know we're not supposed to make it personal, but when I look at this and I think about my child, this will not help him grow and help him succeed, and he will be in his grade 12 year. So I really, really urge, and I know my time is up, but I really urge staff and trustees and whoever is looking at this to take another look at it and get some feedback from parents, from SEAC, on how can we make this more inclusive. I guess it's not really a comment, but it is kind of a comment. How did it miss us? How did it miss us? How did it not come here? And yeah, there you go. I guess those are my questions, but I had to put my preamble in because I'm very upset by this.
Yep, go ahead, please, Mark.
So you see this is in my report, which is why it's here tonight.
It's too late, though.
Well, but it's not. This is a draft that's coming. It's come to many groups along the way over last week and this week. So it's not a done deal.
Okay.
It's here for feedback. So I'm a little concerned that not everyone has seen it. So at this table, so I have it on. Just to change screens. So if it's okay, I was going to talk over there during my report. So if that's okay, I'm going to do that because I want people to be able to see it and we can, have an informed discussion. That's okay? So I appreciate, Denise, your passion and concern for this, which is why it's here tonight. So I want to answer your questions, hear your comments and suggestions, same with everybody here. So just a sec here. So I'm going to change screens here. Am I in the right spot? Yeah, I am. Okay, so as mentioned in my report, this is starts on page 52 in the board package. That's tomorrow night. It's coming for information because we're still want to hear from all stakeholders around this. So for those of you just seeing this for the first time, you can see this is the what's in white with the box around the dark line around is the current floor plan for Nelson High School. This is New Street out here. Is this Belvinia? I can't read that there, but yeah, Belvinia. And what you see in the dark shaded areas are proposed additions. So that just shows you this first map shows you the larger layout of the property and shows you those additions. You can see parking, track, etc. The next floor plan shows you both areas for renovation and areas for addition. So, do you want to drop a lights on this? This has sort of the check marks on it. It's the gridding system. That's an addition. You can see that in a few spots. Thanks, Leah. That's better. Thanks. So these areas where you can see, these are the same additions you saw on the previous floor plan. So this is an addition here, additions up here, and then all the areas that don't have the checks, check coloring, it's just a plain background, is areas for renovation. So that's what you're seeing across this. And that's right. This is the first floor that you're seeing here. So areas to highlight for our focus here are, this is the current library, which is quite a big space that would be renovated to support some of the students in the CPP. You'll notice that on these, and if I go larger here, sorry if you can bear with me. That's better. So you can see these say CSC on them because if for those of you that aren't familiar, within the CPP we have sort of a division of two programs. Students, not all, but most students with a mild intellectual disability are in the Employment Skills Certificate Program, the ESC. And most, not all, but most students with a developmental disability are in the CSC, the Community Skills Certificate Program. So what you see these are all designated as CSC classrooms. You don't see ESC classrooms on here. And that's because students in that ESC track, we plan to have them spread throughout the building in a variety of programs integrated across the school. So they aren't, they may be down here depending on their needs. Our students have quite a range of needs. So some of them will be down here at some points in time during their day, their week. But many will be participating in regular classrooms throughout the school. So this is the CPP area, as you can see there. And this is going to be quite a large kitchen here and sort of a open area here with seating and, meant to be sort of a gathering area where we can do a range of things in this area. We've also brought a program area that students not in the CPP would participate in. The health program we brought down into the CPP area. And we've done this because we've listened to parents who say we want an integration of students. And so by integration, we've gone both ways. It isn't just students in the CPP going in and being involved within the regular school. We also want students in the regular programs coming down into the CPP as well. So we've brought one of those programs, the health program, down into the CPP area also. So that room can be used for that program, and then there's space in there for some CPP programming to happen, depending on the availability. Amy, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering what the square footage, how would that compare to what is currently available to the CPP and essential students who are at Bateman right now?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Because we thought that would be helpful for parents and staff to understand what that square footage looks like. So we are actually gathering it across all the CPPs so that parents can see what's the ratio of students to square footage across the CPPs so that people can understand what that perspective looks like. We came into this knowing that Bateman has a lot of space, and with any school where there's extra space, staff have spread into those spaces. That happens elementary, secondary. You won't walk into a school in our system and say, wow, there's 5 empty classrooms, because they always get used. So we spread, doesn't mean that's what we need. So we know, and we went into this being pretty public, saying there's a lot of space at Bateman that's being utilized by the CPP. It doesn't mean that that's what's necessary to run an effective program. So what you see here in terms of space is what's comparable to the space provided at other CPPs across the system. So, we were, like I said, once again, we were pretty open to say we're not going into this expecting to provide the same amount of space that we're using at Bateman.
As a follow-up, you discuss about having the health program in
Healthcare SHISM, thank you.
the healthcare SHISM using space in the CPP area.
Yeah.
And then you said that some of the students from CPP would also be using other areas of the school because it's a two-way street. So
Right.
I'm wondering, what other areas of the school will students in CPP be using?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll do that. And so I should also mention that we invited Terry Blackwell, who's been here before presenting. Terry, as you know, is in her portfolio, superintendent is overseeing the implementation of the PAR recommendations that came forward last year. And so Terry's here tonight to, knowing that this is on the agenda, to hear people's questions and suggestions and concerns, that so she can take those forward into the work that she's leading. So to look at, should I answer Amy's question first, Denise, or? Sure. Okay.
Yeah, if I could step in for a second, Mark. There's a couple of people on the speakers list, Sherry and Trustee Graves. Okay, so no objections. Clear the list. I know we've jumped ahead in the schedule here, but I'm going to clear the speakers list, and anyone else who has questions, please put your name on the list, and we'll follow those in order. So Go ahead, please, Amy.
So the intention, to Amy's question, the intention is that our students in CPP would be integrated into other areas of the school as appropriate for their profile, right? We know that depending on their needs, that looks different for each student. So therefore, we are renovating many of the shop areas, as you can see. So I'm using shop, technological education, renovating many of those to support an expanded number of students that would be accessing these facilities, and also making sure that they are appropriate for our CPP students. Staff have walked through every one of these shops with the steering committee and with the architectural staff to make sure that they understand, great, that space will work. This space over here needs to be modified or changed in some way to make sure that they are accessible to our CPP students so that they can participate as appropriate. So you can see that across those areas. The food school, and I'll do a bit of a zoom in here. Have I got the right one? Yeah. So let me zoom in here so here you can see the current, I'm not sure if it's showing all of it. Yeah, this is the current CAF, right? Yep. And this is CAF over here. Terry, correct me if I'm saying anything wrong here. So that's...
The food services is part of the current cafeteria, so it's going to be repurposed. So that's where the food school will be. You'll notice that... Sorry. You'll notice that in the
this is a unique situation. Well, it's not unique because Georgetown has the same situation. At Bateman, in terms of food services, they don't have an outside cafeteria supporting the food program in their school. Because Nelson has an existing one, we've got a what is the word I'm looking for? A hybrid. So we've got the food school in there, which will serve food. And we also have the cafeteria. That cafeteria that's marked on there, the white space is actually the servery. So that's the company that has an existing contract within the building that stays there. You'll notice that within the cafeteria space that's in the dotted area, we've included a cafe because we recognize the benefits of the hospitality, and we're taking a page out of Robert Bateman's book in terms of the Pangea room right now. So the kids will have the opportunity in that program to do some of the service pieces that they're currently doing.
And this hybrid model that we have a few different models across our high schools, and this hybrid model that is in existence at Georgetown provides the opportunity to use that combined food delivery and food preparation models. In our schools where the student-run cafeteria provides all the food to the students every day, that's a different type of food school. If you pardon the analogy, it's a bit of a production line because they got to feed whatever size that population is, right? If it's 500, 800, 1,500 students in that school, it's a bit of a production line to feed those students every day. And there is some value in that kind of program that's presented that way. In some of our other schools, the food program doesn't serve the students at all. And so it's provided by an outside food vending service that does that. And so that food school provides a very different type of food school program because there isn't that production demand every day. So instead, there's other kinds of culinary learning that go on for our students in that type of model. So in this hybrid model, we have both things going on at once. We have the contract service in there providing that service, and we have this other model. So there's a bit of both things happening because our students will work in concert with the contractor and being part of that preparation that contractor does. When we did the big renovation at Georgetown and brought this model in there, we couldn't have dreamed how successful it is. I believe they have the capacity for 20 sections a year there, and it's full all year long with demand for more. We just don't have the physical ability to take on more. It's absolutely packed at Georgetown. There's such a and within that, they have students working in there from the CPP, from LEAP, from Essential, and from the other levels of programming, all providing involved in the instructional program in that space. So in order to do that, that's why you see this large addition happening in order to accommodate that. So that's one of the areas where our second area, I talked about the shops, but this is another area where the CPP students would be able to access program. Cosmetology, which is over here, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So Cosmo is another area that we were pretty intentional about in terms of program access and location, because we know that in order for this to have good uptake from the public, because if you're not aware, we really promote our cosmetology programs as providing a service out to the public, and where we do that well, we see lots of foot traffic coming in from our neighbors and other people that know about that program. So we intentionally have put this addition on at this point with a new Cosmo. Right now the Cosmo is located off around the corner in another spot at the back of the school. So we've brought it out here because we want that to have great access from the street coming in, and it's another area that we're going to make sure is fully accessible for our CPP students. And if you look down the other, since we're zoomed in here, you look across the other technology areas. These are all areas where our students in CPP can be integrated. Once again, depending on their needs and their interests. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
So if you look, Mark, if you just scroll up so we can see the tech design, you'll see manufacturing, design tech, computer tech. I know one of the things that you mentioned, Denise, was the ability to access computer labs on the second floor. The computer labs, just in terms of students having access to portable technology, computer labs are really a thing of the past, and they're being dismantled through many of our schools. It's not just Nelson, it would be in high schools, it would be in elementary schools. As Mark mentioned, when there's room, people will put their stuff there. So they've got a lot of boat anchors sitting upstairs in those classrooms, which are being dismantled. And have been dismantled over the past couple of years. So the only access to technology will be on the first floor. And the spaces will be designed in a very accessible way. As with the library, the accessibility in the library is far superior than the existing library. So that was part of the rationale as well. One of the things in terms of getting to the second floor, I know that there's been some conversation around the lifts and
change maps here.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And having the ability for kids to access that space. The second floor, there are 2 lifts to the second floor. One of the things that the architect is doing is they are reevaluating those spaces, the lifts, and seeing if they need to be expanded, the elevators, so that more students can move at once. Again, the library is not a library as when we went to school. We don't just take classes to the library anymore, and this would be all students. It's more of a learning commons approach, learning area, where students will go and you might see a handful of kids leaving from a class at a time. So as we know that there are many students that are able to access the second floor that are in the program. And so they'll be able to do that. There are many staircases. There's also a bridge that comes across that is new that will attach to the second floor. And so those spaces will be accessible, and we're revisiting the lift pieces and the elevator.
So
the outdoor space.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yep, thanks. Keep me on track with Denise's questions. So Denise, you're asking about an outdoor space. So you know that we've oh, is it there? Sorry, thanks. I didn't know it was included there. Great. Yeah. So you heard that we have allocated through our existing budget funds to support the creation of an outdoor learning space for all of our CPPs. And this is new learning. And I think I shared here as well that we have gone out asking questions in other boards about these spaces, and that there's a little bit of this out there in other boards, but not much. And we've had lots of response saying, wow, what a fantastic idea. We would like to do that as well. Please let us know what you design, because not many other boards have done much of this. We've seen a little bit of it in Toronto and a little bit in Peel, but we're going to be on the front lines of coming up with some great spaces. So we have this here. I apologize, that looks like a fence because there's no intention of putting a fence there. That's not what we plan to do. And it's not even going to look like that. That's just a line that the architect has put there just to show people that there's going to be an outdoor learning space there. From a design standpoint, we've already been working with the architect and the staff and our environmental sustainability officer in our board, and there's another firm called Evergreen that we have worked with in the creation of many of our outdoor classrooms at schools to create those outdoor learning spaces. So we've already begun that design work for MMR. And we're working on that design there first because, as you know, the construction work is beginning there this summer and into the fall. And so our hope is to have that outdoor space ready there for September. So we are intentionally not building these all at once. We learned a lot when we implemented full-day kindergarten, and as we went along, we got better and better and learned more and more as we went along through that 5-year implementation, and so that we know we're going to learn as we go through this as well. So we're starting with the MM outdoor learning space and design, and then we're going to take what we learn there and apply it to other spaces, including this one as well. So what you see here is not any specific kind of rendering at all. It's just a spot on a site plan to show you that there's going to be a learning space there. That's all it is. The intent is not to have it fenced in any way, shape, or form. The intent is to have a rich learning space, and not just that our CPP students can benefit from. We want other students as well accessing this space. Because we see benefit to other students. You know, many of the design elements that we're going to incorporating into these schools benefit many students, not just ones from a specific program. So the elements that you see here will be accessible and beneficial to students in CPP and in other levels and programming. So that's coming, and we're working on that very keenly at MM right now. Denise, location. Can we talk about location of the school, of the program in this area? Oh.
The concern is, why can't the CPP be, can you go back to the first floor?
Right here.
So you're way
This
down
one?
here in the corner. Go back up, please. Why can't the CPP be up there across from the cafeteria, more in the center of the school?
Great question. So we talked about this a lot, and actually, can I take you back to the site plan? So if you look at this, and we talked a lot about the access. We know that drop-off and pickup is important, very important, depending on the student and their profile, and we really want our students to have a range of options of what's appropriate. So if we located the program somewhere over in the middle of the school, keeping in mind this is just the overall footprint, but if we located it somewhere in here, then we're basically bringing all of our students in through this front entrance. And we knew that would be good for some students, problematic for others, both in terms of their drop-off and pickup out here in the parking lot, and also their entry into the school. Whereas when we spread the program across the school, as we've described, that there would be multiple entry points across here. So some of the students who really benefit from direct entry into this area, there will be specific entry doors there for students coming in wheelchairs and with other needs and walkers and those kinds of things. They can come right into into the CPP area there. Some other students might say, it's beneficial for me to come in through this entrance because here's my first class of the day, or through this entrance, etc. Also, that the majority of the intent is for us to have a bus lay-by here out on Belvinia, and so the majority of our large regular buses would be dropping off here, and that having this as a specific sort of mini bus or accessible bus drop-off, that this would be more private for students, because we heard that from parents as well, that they would appreciate that. So by locating it here in this, in the old library, that we're spreading entry options across the front of the school. That the program is right there, front and center in the front of the school, all the way across, as opposed to being tucked away, in the back or another place.
Have you ever stood at that corner during drop off and pickup?
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you seen the number of cars going in and out of there?
Yeah,
That is going to create traffic chaos.
yeah. So within that, and we had a lot of discussions with the architect about that. We talked at one point about doing a drop off out here, and doing a bus loop out on this area, and that's problematic from a traffic flow out on New Street. As we talked about it more, we said, the city's not going to go for that. But we thought there were a lot of benefits to having a few different drop-off locations. But knowing that, locating in other areas, you could say there's pros and cons of each. We thought there were a lot of benefits in terms of creating more options by having it located here. The volume of traffic, we're going to, by diverting the large buses and keeping them out on the street.
This isn't bus traffic, this is car traffic.
Yeah, and then we're also going to change the configuration of the driveway there. If you can look on there, you can see this is sort of the current width of that driveway, and we would be expanding it. So in essence, we're creating another bus lay-by along here so that the buses can pull. This is a pretty broad sidewalk if you know the space. So we can cut into that sidewalk and create an additional lay-by across here for the other buses, so that traffic can still flow in here and get to the parking lot. And then we're moving the current exit, I believe, is right here. Is that right, Terry? So we're moving the exit further down because we know we have parents who are dropping off at the end of the day, right, and picking up. So by extending this laneway, if you want to call it, and having it exit here, we can draw traffic down this way, and create more space for that to happen to reduce the congestion here. So those are all pieces that we talked a lot with the architects about because we want to really minimize that traffic problem that you're talking about. We're very aware of it. So we'll have that spot for the buses to pull off here and more space for if you want to call it the kiss and ride, to happen further down towards the track area.
Okay, sorry, Mark, while you're on that slide, it's just easier to point at it. Is this solid curving here?
Terry, do you know, is that solid curving?
These are all solid.
They're existing.
So we have a very obvious choke point right here. Mm-hmm. All it takes is one parent in an SUV haggling with their kid to shut the whole thing down. Mm-hmm. And that happens on the regular at Nelson.
Yeah.
My daughter used to go there. I wouldn't even try pulling into this parking lot. Parents let the kids off up on the street up here, and they walk the last half block.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. The traffic situation in here, I can't believe that this is being offered as a solution. Obviously, honestly, looks like it's being created by someone who has never been there. Mm-hmm. Because this is a complete horror show every weekday morning and every weekday afternoon now. And we're talking about adding something on the order of 15 or 20 buses to this, plus the additional students that, despite all of this walk to school methodology that everyone insists is important, can't make it 2 blocks without being ferried around by their parents. So you're going to have, another 30 cars and another 20 buses in an area that has physically not changed. I would be surprised, and I don't know if it's being measured. Can 2 minibuses fit side by side in this drop-off area here? Because if not,
Talking about one to be pulled over into the lay-by and one to drive
and
past.
one to pull ahead.
Yeah, it'll definitely be big enough for that. No question.
Not if there's cars there where parents are just stopped wherever they want.
Yeah.
Well, and that's And that's a problem in every parking lot in our system. So that isn't unique here at all. And that's an area that staff are working with parents every day, to be mindful and respectful of what those needs look like. So it's not limited to, yeah. So I know you have a speakers list, but I think Jean has her hand because she doesn't have a button.
If I can just add from George.
When I've been there in the morning, they actually block off the entranceway off of Guelph Street into the school. There's teachers or some supervisors out there that pull it across, a blocker across, so that the buses can come in, and then they block it off so that there isn't the flow of cars through that parking lot. So there's different ways of looking at mediating the traffic and the flow and the busyness to make it safe for everybody. Clearly, the messaging around walking to school or that sort of thing, we need to continue to work on that. But that would be one possible solution that at least I can offer that up as what Georgetown is doing anyway, because of the same large number of buses that come into that school each day.
One of the things, if you don't mind, one of the things that you asked, have I seen it in the morning? I've actually sat in the parking lot, and I've got lots of pictures in the morning because it's really important that we've got some plans moving forward, and we know that there will be a change. I was there last week in the morning, and from about here down, this is a different configuration, but from about here down, the only cars in the parking lot were overnight cars that had frost on them. This area gets backed up for about 10 minutes in the morning, mostly from 8 to 8:10. So the traffic issues on a regular basis are from about that window. So it's really purposeful that we continue to look at the traffic patterns and monitor as they do come in. We know when the peak periods are, and we design plans to support students in those periods. There's also a through way here that didn't exist before. So those roads have now lined up, which in terms of the design pieces. So we are looking at the traffic flow, and we know that there will be additional traffic, and the principals and their schools are very aware of in working together to make sure that there is a plan when we start.
And through all of this, we would love your suggestions. We appreciate your perspective that you bring to this, because many of you live this every day, and so if you have suggestions that would help us in this design work, we'd love to hear them. That's why it's here tonight. There's been a pretty planned rollout of this. These drawings have just come from the architect in the last week or so. So we shared these with the steering committee.
Beginning of March, just before March break.
Yeah, and
they weren't these plans.
And they went back for some changes from that because there was a fair bit of feedback at that point. Then they were shared with the school council chairs last week, and then coming here tonight, going to trustees tomorrow night, going to parent open houses on Thursday night. So all shared across those, getting more and more feedback as we go.
And the following week with parents with CPP.
Oh, thank you. Then the following week again with parents, specifically in CPP, because we want to hear your feedback. So please know that these aren't, if you're hearing that these are a done deal, they aren't. If it looks like it from a, sort of a drawing standpoint, please appreciate that we wanted to have some detail to bring to you. So that's why you see what you see. But is it done? No, not by any means. We certainly want your feedback.
Okay, Trustee Graves, you're still on the list. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, and I'll be really brief because I know I'll have a chance to comment and have questions tomorrow night. But first, I wanted to ask how many students would be in a CSC room at one time, and then my other question has to do with storage. My perspective is I've seen these rooms at Craig Kilberger a lot. I've been and talked to EAs and teachers and seen the classes quite a bit. And every time I ask, because we're building a new high school in Milton, how's the space? What do you need? And a lot of it now has to do with the storage space for the equipment. So I was wondering if that storage would be where the equipment would be. So like some students would have a wheelchair perhaps and a walker. Some might have the large 3-wheel cycles. Is that where all of that is going to go? And is that enough space? Like, those are the questions that I'm likely to have. You're getting a precursor of what I'll be doing tomorrow night. Because I've seen the space at Kilberger now. First they were in the staff room, I think, and then they grew out of that. Now they're in the hallway. But that's the biggest concern that I've heard there is that equipment seems to be increasing as time goes on, and it's probably still on an upward trend. And then my third question just has to do, if you could scroll up over by the cafeteria. Yeah, the space that is white that says cafeteria, and there's some weird walls in there. Like, that whole area doesn't seem to be named. I was just wondering what was going into that space.
So how about we'll start there, since I've got the floor plan there, Terry.
So I will start here.
Yes, you will.
So where the arrow is right now, that's the servery. So that's the company that will that we already have a contract with. Their space will be existing. So they have facilities in there, and then there's space for kids to enter or
So this is for flow of students coming in and out, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. So great question came around storage and equipment, and you are absolutely right that the equipment that our students are utilizing is growing. The number of the pieces of equipment and the size and complexity, right? So great benefits for our students for sure, but it leaves us with where the heck do we put this stuff? So, and it's interesting, when we were touring the schools in Peel, we heard both perspectives. We heard staff say, yeah, we need storage to get this stuff sort of out of the way and, make our hallways safe and all those kinds of things. And so we need a storage area, which you see there. And then we had other perspectives saying, we like having it right outside the door, right? It's nice and accessible to go and zip out and grab it and not have to go down the hall to the storage area, et cetera. So we were conscious of building a storage area for equipment, but also mindful that some of it will stay in some of the rooms, depending on the needs of students, because it gets used so frequently. Others will benefit from it being, just outside the classroom door, wherever that might be, because that will be important as well. So, and maybe I'll mention one other thing. You see, right now you see this space, and some of it's been redesigned, to meet the needs of our students. But we also were mindful that if at some point in time our needs change and we need more space, that these other rooms are there and have that potential as well. So right now, when we look at our CPP projections for Nelson, they're basically at their peak next year. Next year in 2020. Even then, they're going down, and the numbers continue to decrease over time. That's the projections. So we know that we need to build certainly a big enough space for those students coming in, but over time we should see fewer numbers and therefore less demands on the space that we're creating.
She asked how many students in a CSC.
Oh, thank you. Terry always keeps me on track. So our number in a CSC is a ratio of 10 to 1. But when you say how many students are in a class at a time, it really depends on the enrollment and so for example, if we have 25 students in this, at the CSC side of the program, you're only going to have on average 8 in a class, right? And that's if they're all in there at the same time, because our students are often out doing other things in terms of mobility, therapy, could be accessing, program in the kitchen, congregating in other areas in terms of programming and support. So actually seeing all the students in the classroom at the same time isn't a regular occurrence. They're in and out with some regularity. So the max you would see at a time would be 10.
Thank you. Next is Denise.
I'm just gonna make this really quick because I've kind of pretty much had my say. I still don't think that where the CPP is creates inclusion. It does not encourage the environment that currently these students have at Bateman, because they have to come down, and you even said it yourself, Mark, they have to come down to the CPP area. And if we want to create an inclusive environment, they need to be more in the heart of the school so that you can create that inclusion and that everyday occurrence of having a student in a wheelchair, having a student roll by. And if they're down in the corner of the school, you're not going to create that unless a very concentrated effort is made. And I just think that they are better if they can be more central to the school.
Sophia, go ahead.
So our association, the families, will be taking a look at this, and I think I need to have some answers for them as to how likely it would be for changes to actually be made to this plan based on feedback. So I'll be sharing this with our association in our newsletter, and I'll sort of open up, if they have concerns, they can share it with me and I can bring it to the meeting. But what can I take back to them with respect to, can I assure them that yes, your feedback will be taken into account and changes are likely based on what families suggest? Realistically.
We wouldn't be asking for feedback if we weren't going to do anything with it. So for sure, it will be considered. I'm sure you appreciate that we have to balance what's suggested with what's possible from an architectural standpoint, building code, all those other things, AODA, all that has to be part of this, and feasible. So, I can tell you, our first sort of wish list or plan, even that wasn't dreaming, pie in the sky, but we said, this would be great. We should do this and that, and this won't be too expensive, was how many million over? Yeah, like 6 or 7 million over our budget. So, we had to say, okay, so that's, not realistic. We still got all that we wanted, but some of those sort of extras and things we would like to see, we couldn't afford. So, will parent input be considered? Absolutely. If all the changes don't happen, I would never want people to think that we didn't listen, because that's not the case at all. We're looking at what's possible in all of those ways. And please keep in mind that we are listening as well to staff from a program standpoint, and knowing that parents bring their home experience to this and perspective, but we have staff that bring a programming perspective as well. So we would bring all that together in listening to that feedback. And
yeah, no, absolutely. I was reminded by a parent this week, and they said, during the park, the board had said publicly that Bateman students would have access to the same or better facilities when at Nelson. So it's just that accountability piece where families will look at this and say, that's not better. That's not the same. There's some pieces missing. And we talked about budgets when this whole thing came up. We talked about budgets, and, and that was a concern. Families said, well, how are you going to do that? How is that going to be affordable? So now, my job is to take this back to our families, and a lot of families that this is going to affect directly. And they are going to be concerned about, this is not better and it's not the same.
Yeah. So I think, yes, we did say it will be better. And if you walk into that library right now, it's basically a big open area full of book stacks, and that's it. There are some, if you want to call them seminar rooms, along the one wall in the back a bit. Otherwise, it's a big open space, and it's an old library. You know, to be honest, you know, it's nothing you're going to say, wow, what a great space. This will be basically gutted and turned into a big, beautiful space. I don't know if you were here when we showed the before and after shots of our renovations at White Oaks that we did over the summer.
No, but I've been part of the Learning Commons, like I'm a librarian in Peel.
Okay.
And so we're all moving to Learning Commons. So I can imagine what you're
Yeah.
saying with technology. And for sure, these are dated, like they no longer exist in a lot of schools anymore anyway.
Right.
The old
Yeah.
libraries.
Yeah. So but at White Oaks, we took an old space and showed here a video. We can post a link to it if that would help. And you know, when you're going back to your parent association, but it shows what that space looked like at White Oaks last spring, and then what it looks like now. And to see the transformation, and you know, the comments here were that was pretty impressive, and that wasn't an exception. We do that every day. I'd say every year here when we modify space.
Yeah. I'm thinking more from the perspective of the kids that are in CPP and accessibility and all that. So that would be our concern.
So, so this is all very accessible, and we will be, and will be all shiny new, for lack of a better term, but will be a great space here. So, but we certainly welcome the feedback.
Thank you, Sophie. Trustee Graves, I believe you had a question?
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. Parking, like some of the emails that have come in, parking spots, have they increased sufficiently? And also washroom / change rooms, are there are there enough of those as well? That was some of the questions.
So here's the site plan again with the parking. So there's been a reorientation in here that's created some more parking. Is that right, Terry? And then I think, is this the same, or have we added space here?
They're added. They're all added spaces.
These are all additional on here as well. So, you know, we've looked at what the staff and, you know, visitor needs are. And, you know, in our count have increased parking, you know, accordingly. And once again, you know, Terry spent a lot of time there, as have the architectural staff and others who have been studying the space and saying, it's not full now. If you're there, which most people are, most of the people, their experience of being at the school is drop off and pick up. Does it look really busy during that time? During that time, yes. But after that, you know, in the middle of the day, it's not. So we're adding spaces. Your other question, Jean, around washrooms, change rooms. We have had some good discussions with the staff at Bateman, understanding what those needs look like. And we've actually already made a change. I can't remember which room it is. I think it's this one here. Do you remember, Terry? Where we've added, because we heard this feedback over the last couple of weeks, and we've already asked the architect to make a change, just to evidence that we are listening, and added another change room. I think it's back here. I'd have to check with the architect. But we decided we could add, and I'm saying change room as opposed to washroom, because we know a number of our students need changing. They don't use a toilet per se, right? They're being, you know, the personal care is happening on a change table. And so we're adding a change room back here that would include, you know, a mechanized, motorized change table, as well as sink, so that the students could be changed back here. And once again, you know, that having it at the back of the classroom gives more privacy to students coming in and out of there as well. Because we know there are some students who might be changed 4 times a day, right? And so there's a whole schedule for that staff develop across, and you know, they know who's using which washrooms when. So we've added that by hearing the feedback from the Bateman staff.
Thank you. Trustee Collard, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear about the consultation and that feedback will be considered, because I know that there are many people that are currently at Bateman who are very nervous about the transition to Nelson. They want to know that their kids are going to be getting what they need, and so the consultation is very, very important. I think it would be helpful if in the next transition we could have a mock-up of what the layout of these rooms might be like, and so that people can see, visualize the space. The same with the outdoor learning area. Give us a sense of what that might look like. I'm also thinking that it would be a good idea for perhaps tours to be starting. I don't know what kind of schedule to run that on, but to familiarize families with what the Nelson layout is like, what the distance is between the current library and the tech area or the food service area. Also to know where the elevator / lifts would be located. Because I know that these students will want to access the library. And so if we can only take 2 students at a time up to the library, how does that work? The other questions that I have are mostly about the outside, where they have the lay-by on the street. I know that we will need to have city sign off to create a lay-by there, and I'm wondering if they would be looking at widening the street and whose budget that would come out of. I don't expect an answer to that now, but it's a consideration. Where we're considering putting the extra width for the buses, I can tell you that people in passenger vehicles, cars, vans, SUVs, will not always respect that is a bus lane. And so we need to be very intentional about marking that as a bus lane. I would like to know the number of parking spaces currently and the number of parking spaces in the new plan. I would like to know the current capacity of Nelson and what the new capacity will be with the renovations. I would also like to know the number of students that we anticipate having compared to now. And, oh, yes, the residential road that the driveway will be coming through onto. We have a situation at Alexander's where there's a road that people quite often use to get around using Sutton. And they've actually the city has made no through traffic signs onto it, that you're not allowed to use that as a through road to get out of the community. And so this is, again, an area where you're going to need the cooperation of the city in order to make that change, and possibly the objections of the community that lives on that road if that starts becoming a through street for them. My last observation would be about, if we're going to have equipment in the hallways, the fire marshal may have a complaint about that. And lastly, just wondering, when this consultation is over and we've got all the feedback to the architects and they've come back, how long do we expect that to take, and when do we expect a final plan?
Terry's been writing madly, capturing your questions. Yeah, that too. And I'll just mention, Jason, that certainly welcome whatever questions and whatever time it takes tonight to answer those. But also, I would like to also share the MMR renovations as well, because they do impact on the CPP also. So whenever we're able to move on to that, it'd be great as also. Thank you.
Yeah, Denise has just reminded me that we will need a motion to extend. Raised by Sophie, seconded by Trustee Graves. All in favor? Any opposed? Just one. Sorry, Diane, you're in for the duration. Normally you have our full support, but
Diane would like
this
a
steam
recorded
train
vote.
is heading downhill, and we can't stop it. Trustee Caller, did you have a further question?
Oh, I think I've more than used up my time.
Thank you. Sherry, you're next, please.
Okay, this is going to be the fastest one of the night on this subject. Just on the topic of transportation in and around the school and all that kind of stuff, I think there's a lot of sensitivity given some of the accidents that have happened in Toronto and all that kind of stuff. And, looking at our schools, it's, amazes me that we haven't really done a good job just in general of traffic management around schools and things like that. So I just wanted to offer that one really best practice that we do have in Halton is at Brookville. And so if you've been to Brookville, they have a kiss and ride that is completely separate from the parking lot that parents use in the morning and the evening. So parents do not enter the main parking lot at all. They built it, they did some renovations a number of years ago, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, and they built this kiss and ride. Now, they may have had a little bit more space to deal with, but when you tell me that there's cars that have been there overnight, I wonder, if you're going to be looking at studies and how many spots and everything else, and you look at cost, benefit, and risk and everything else, it might be worth doing that. So I would encourage you, if you haven't been to Brookville, drive up Guelph Line and take a look because it's really fantastic. And when they get dropped off, they do not have to walk through the parking lot to get to where they need to be. It's good.
Thank you, Sherry. Next on the speakers list is myself. So I do have a couple of points I want to raise. Since we're talking about exterior, I do have grave concerns about the traffic flow here. I'm assuming that these spots here are accessible parking spots? Is that correct?
Yes. These ones here?
Yeah.
These
No, sorry.
Go ahead.
Right here.
Those ones there?
Yeah.
All right, so we do have accessible parking spots that do not have direct access to the or the sidewalk, right? They have to cross over that bus lane. That's
what this is here. This will be a marked sidewalk going across that area there.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And the last time I went to an evening function, someone thought that was a perfect place to park their car because no one else was using it. Right? Took up half a disabled parking spot or handicap accessible spot and blocked that passageway for people walking through. It is honestly, during the day is one thing. You have an evening function there and it's Lord of the Flies. It really is. It's just.
I'm wondering, and I'll take that back, Jason, but I'm wondering about the spaces along the side of the building that are newly created, if perhaps there's accessible spaces that are further away and direct access to the door. So I'll bring that back to the architect.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, for example, at Bateman, there are accessible parking spots immediately adjacent to the entry to the CPP spaces because there are kids that have medical appointments, dental appointments, and so on that have to get dropped off partway through the day. And close is important, obviously, for that sort of thing, as that's the whole reason for accessible parking. Otherwise, everyone would put it in the back corner. Another area I think that may, even if the city approves it, is going to have severe blowback by the residents in this area. With this traffic pattern, all the large buses now are forced to come south on Belvinia, which means they are entering this area by coming across Flemish and down Longmore, which is already an extremely busy street. There's no way for a bus turning north on Belvinia to use that space unless I'm misreading how it's meant to be used. You can't have buses going in both directions there. Are they meant to be going north?
Are you talking about when they're coming out here through the main exit?
This lay-by here.
Right.
Which way are the
I
buses
see.
facing? Are they going
Yeah,
this way?
they'd be coming this way and then, right, continuing on Belvinia.
So
right.
whether they're going north or south there, they're all forced to exit off onto residential streets.
Yep.
Right? So at least now buses have the option of taking through the bus loop and coming back out onto New Street.
Right.
This is going to put them all into residential streets. This entire neighborhood has one street on the west side that exits to Walker's Line. and that's Flemish Drive, right? Having lived there for several years, the traffic in the morning is unbelievable with the number of buses and passenger cars going through there. And this will cause a lot of issues with the residents in the neighborhood. Maybe not right away, but they'll get on it soon. And in closing, just when I look at this and I realize you've explained a few of these things and made them sound better than they first appear, my initial impressions were this is so far away from what the parents, students, and the trustees were promised was going to happen with Nelson that I'm kind of shocked, because everything that was either directly promised or implied, I don't see as happening. I don't see this as inclusive. You put the CPB kids as far away from the center of the school as possible, and as far away from any streaming opportunities or other classroom spaces they use. Other students may not go en masse to the library, but CPB kids do. They regularly make classroom trips there, whether it's simple as a book fair or they're going up there to have a story read to them or whatever the case may be. And we've got this microscopic elevator that's going to take 10 or 15 cycles to get the whole classroom up there. I just think that's poorly planned. And it's these kids are just simply losing out here. They're already losing their swimming pool. Now they're losing convenient access to the track. They're getting put off in one corner of the school, and I don't see this as being integrated or inclusive in any way. So I'll just finish with that. I don't expect you to comment or respond to it, but that's just my comment on this. Anyone else before we move on to the next subject?
Kim, just put yourself on.
Oh, please go ahead, Trustee Graves.
I'm just wondering if there have been any concerns from Craig Kielburger High School about some of the questions raised here. So like I said, I've been there a lot and been asking a lot of questions in anticipation of the new build, and the major feedback that I've gotten was about the storage space. Otherwise, they seem really happy with the space. And I know that their library is on the second floor, and that where the students are situated is in the northwest corner, and the track is in the southeast. I'm just wondering, have any concerns ever come up from that school? And that question could go to anyone, but it's not something I've ever heard as having been a concern, and I've asked a lot, and I know that they really like the space there.
Certainly we ask feedback all the time from staff about different spaces. I make a point of doing that every time I walk into one of our schools that has one of our programs. I ask them for a variety of pieces of feedback. So you're right, at CK the staff are quite happy with the space there at Craig Kielburger, and they do your orientation of where they're at is quite accurate and fair. So they have a bit of a walk to the track, which they don't mind at all. A bit of it is what you know, right? What you're used to, and so they're familiar and used to that, and it works fine for them, right? Same with the library on the second floor. So we've looked at the distance to the track from the current, for what's at Bateman, and it's about 100-meter walk. Here it'll be about 200 meters. So there is that extra distance, but we don't think it's an obstacle. It's just a bit of a farther go. You have a much superior track at Nelson compared to Bateman. That's had quite an upgrade and much more accessible with the all-weather turf that can be used all year long as opposed to the grass. So it makes it more accessible throughout the course of the year as opposed to what's at Bateman. So, we think there's lots of benefits in terms of the access to that track. there more questions, or do you want me to go on to MM?
Next on the list is Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. Just to build on what Trustee Graves has shared, I think it would be helpful in when we do outreach or communication to the community to share what sort of best practices we've integrated into this project, because certainly what I've heard tonight is the experiences in other parts of the board where things are working well and how they were integrated in here, and vice versa. But I think at the end of the day, it's really good if we could identify what is the best practice, or the benefit, and be able to see them very physical, outlined why this is a benefit or not, so that the community can assess that. Certainly some of the information you shared tonight has been helpful in sort of my perspective on how I'm looking at this and what I've heard. So I appreciate that, and I think there's others will as well.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that, your comments and suggestions. I do not know, we started this as SEAC discussion and question period. Were there any discussion items or questions not related to...
Sorry, Sherry, put yourself back on again. I canceled the last one. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Appearing there is. Go ahead, please, Sherry.
Thank you. So question, it's a request really. So from the discussion that we had earlier when I asked about the special education plan and you talked about some things that were going on. So can we get a presentation on how we are addressing specifically the reduction in the IRTs? So what PD that you said we've done and to whom, how specifically we are growing the CERT capacity in each of our exceptionalities, and how that is being shared among not only the CERT population, but also teachers, and also an overview, because you mentioned that the IPLs are also doing some of that work, an overview of our IPLs and how they are supporting those needs, how they are doing some of that that was previously done by the IRTs. And I think just as part of that, I would love just a little bit more information about what our IPLs really do. I'm sure they're busy and I know they're doing a lot of things, but I think that'll come out as part of that. And could we request that? Thank you.
Yeah, we can do that and certainly decide where in future agendas that would fit.
I guess that ends question period. So next is superintendent's report. I know, Mark, that you were going to cover the work on Nelson. You also wanted to talk about MMR. Yep. If you want to step into that minefield, please.
Yeah. Thank you for that invitation. So
feel free to get ready, everyone. Yeah.
Do people want lights on or off? It's up to you. Or do you want one bank of lights down? So here you can see the, is that good? So here you can see the footprint of MMR. Here are this is just showing you the two additions that are planned for this. And you can see all the rest of what's on the site, on this site plan. And this is the building we're in here right now. If you're just running on the orientation, we're over there. So now you can see the sketch plan showing the interior. So this is show you the back of the building first. Here you see both the CPP hallway, which is down here at the back of the school, and we're not doing any additions here. There isn't a need for that in terms of footprint and capacity of the building, but we have identified some areas that we want to renovate. So these are currently, maybe to go to the questions before about the need for computer labs, these are 2 old computer labs which are going to be discontinued because the technology is in the kids' hands, right? So these are being renovated and turned into spaces for our CPP students. And we're going to do a pretty extensive washroom renovation in 2 spaces here because we really need some upgraded spaces there for our students. And this, I believe, without zooming in, is a bit of a therapy room or a quiet space for some of our students as well. So these are all some pretty great spaces already in place, but we're going to add to it because we know we have growing numbers in our CPP in the north of Burlington, and so we want to create spaces to accommodate those students. So that's what you see there. Over here, this is the current cafeteria. But you know that we're going to build a food school at MMR. So we're going to add a new caf out the back. That's the addition that you see here. And the existing will turn into a food school that you see there. So there's a number of dominoes that would have to happen for this to occur. In both of these, there's a progression of construction and renovation that would happen. So that's at the back of the school. At the front of the school, you can see an addition here of additional classrooms and spaces, but this is 3 stories. So you're only seeing the first floor here, or first or second floor? Is this the second? This is the first floor? Second floor. This is the second floor that you're seeing here. But this is a 3-floor addition that's coming on the end of the front of the school here. So. And then I'll also mention, I could have shown you in the back, but I can show you here. This here is where our outdoor learning space is going to be built in this area for MMR. So if you know the space at all, this is a learning area as well. This is a bit of a memorial garden that's back here with some sort of big steps in place, some trees, etc. And then this is green space with a sort of a slight sidewalk along here, and there's a hill that runs along here. But we've got our architect and outdoor space consultant already designing an outdoor space that's going to go on here in that construction in the summer. So we'll come. I said to you before that we would come to you with details of what that will look like, but we're excited about what that's going to look like. So that's going to be in there. And then I'll keep on scrolling. You can see a bit of, sorry, I'm going to zoom back. You can see a bit of what's going to happen inside around the, you know that we're bringing the 2 schools together. So they've already been planning the renaming of the Lester B. Pearson Theater. It's going to be here, and some of the integration of design that's going to happen. This addition out front is going to create a real tune-up face look on the outside of the building. Yeah, it looks we're really impressed with the design the architect has created here. All this, when you go out tonight, I think it's kind of dark, but if you look, this is all kind of tired looking, and there's staining that's coming out and they could clean it up, but it's just going to come back in a few years. So all that's going to be reclad on the outside of the building. It's really all this and on the other side, the side that faces out onto New Street, all redone, all reclad, and with this really nice new addition out front. It's going to look really great. And if you can appreciate, this kind of detail will come with Nelson, right? We're not there yet. This is happening first, so we've got this kind of detail that's got to, the giddy up's going to happen there. But this kind of detail and refreshing, et cetera, will come when we look at Nelson as well. So those are the changes for you to see in these sketch plans for MMR. Any questions? Or are we questioned out about this stuff? And please don't feel that tonight's the only night. I know Sophia wants to take this back and get some other input from her parents. Certainly others, we welcome that as well. So the other, I'll flip back here then. So the other two things in my report, one you saw is the addition of 6 new classes coming in for September. We've had a number of students that, that parents have identified this as their program of choice to be in a self-contained class. So that's coming in one class move. And then you saw my other note there around the provincial budget. So those are some of the things that I've listed there in the provincial budget. However, and I think you've heard this from me before, it's the details that matter. So we have the announcement that we have isn't really any different than what you've seen in the press, where you see, the government say 700 million going into this, 150 million going into that. All those kinds of things are the same detail that we have so far as staff. And this is the regular sort of process with the province. They make their budget announcements, and then it's a good 3 or 4 weeks later that we get the technical paper. And that's what gives us the real detail of, okay, so you've said there's going to be 4 positions. Well, how much money comes with that? Do we really get the money to pay for 4 positions at our salary grid or not? They say there's this much money for assessments. Well, how much money is that really? And how many assessments can we do with those, et cetera? So all of that, we have not received those details yet. And also, if you've seen any of those details, some of it is in the budget now, which means the funding is coming. So I'm not going to get political in any way, but I'm just going to say that whether we have a change in government or not, that funding is coming to school boards. There are some other parts of the funding announcements that are captured in what's called Education Programs Other, EPO grants. Those come to us in the fall, so we don't know the details of those until they get announced and released to us. So those are determined by the government that's going to be in power at the time. So the current government has said these are, so for example, the additional dollars for assessments, that's an EPO grant. So we aren't holding our breath. It all depends on the outcome of the election to see whether or not those actual grants will materialize. So it depends on which pot of money those sort of promises are coming in. So that's all I'll say about the provincial grants and the budget. Any questions on either that or the new classes?
No, I don't see any. Thank you, Mark. Next are association reports. Do we have any? Sherry, ABC, go ahead.
Thank you. 3 things. So first of all, ABC Halton is thrilled to announce that Victoria Lark is our new ABC Halton president. We've actually been without a president for a while, so we're super excited that Victoria has agreed to be our president. So she's just getting up to speed. Secondly, ABC Halton is hosting a parent information night on Thursday, May the 17th. We have a special guest speaker, Natalie Orenchek-Tomiak, who will speak on anxiety in gifted children, as well as tools to assess, manage, and resolve those challenges. And then also, FYI, there's a free online conference. It's got nothing to do with ABC, but it's called the Bright and Quirky Child Online Summit. It's aimed at families with twice exceptional children who are bright and something else. It's 6 days. It's free. It's online. There's 3 to 5 sessions per day, and I'm sharing it because I think other than just gifted would be interested in seeing that. So I'll provide the link in my update, and it'll be in the minutes if anybody's interested. It's kind of interesting. I think it's out of the States, but I'm sending it. Yeah. Yeah. There's an awful lot of speakers, and one of them is, what's her name? Anyway, I'm looking for her name. I'm looking at her picture, and I can't remember her name. But as soon as I say it, you'll know who she is. Oh, here it is. Temple Grandin is one of the speakers, as well as others. So it's free, so I'll send out the link, and if anybody wants to attend, you can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other association reports? No. Then on to trustee reports.
But I have a couple of pieces, and then you can build on some of the other pieces. I went to one of the budget meetings, so I have the very thick budget book. If anyone would like to ask me questions about that, there's a few good things in there for education. It just would be interesting to see how it comes out on the technical paper for sure. In terms of what's at the board table, the school year calendar is coming up this week, and we've had a lot of discussion about a couple of the dates in there. And one is about a Friday that conflicted with some of our agricultural fairs and the education day associated with those. It looks like the revised one that has moved. The next big one I expect would be, there's a lot of talk about the election date, whether or not we have a PA day on that day. So I expect that will be a conversation. Education and development charges, I'm sure you're not interested in, but also a report on the admin center is coming up as well on Wednesday, along with all of the sketch plans that you see here. They're all in the board package. So it's just a matter of looking at the index. There's a lot for information, and our operational plan is there. We see it on Wednesday, and then it will be approved 2 weeks from now. So if you have any input on the operational plan, that now would be a good time to have a look and send your feedback even directly to trustees. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Graves. Trustee Reynolds, did you have an additional report? No. Okay. Next, committees and other reports, starting with PIC. Dawn's not here. Accessibility Coordinating Committee. Rochelle is not here.
And Melissa left.
So we're going to go with no on that. Equity, I'm going to have to sit down for this one. Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee.
Nothing to report. We meet April 12th.
Thank you, Diane. Working Together document. Sherry, do you have anything on that?
I wasn't at the last meeting, and so I'll let Mark give an update, but so I volunteered to be on this committee because I've sort of not been working for 5 months. I was able to attend the one meeting in December. I was not able to attend last week. I'm back to work now, so I can no longer attend during the day. So I'm happy to try to remotely participate, but if there's anybody else who's available during the day that wants to attend these on behalf of SEAC, not that I'm trying to shirk it, but I can't be there during the day and wants to volunteer, please let me know. If nobody does, then I'll stay involved as much as I can remotely, and I may be able to call in and things like that, so I'll let you update.
And actually, we ended up, if you recall, we ended up canceling our last meeting.
That's right.
Yeah. And our next one is April 11th.
Hey, Mark, could you send out the schedule for those meetings so anyone who is interested could look at their schedule and check their availability?
Yes.
Thank you. Next is MMR LPB integration. There have been no meetings that I've attended recently. There haven't been any meetings other than subcommittee working meetings, so no update on that. And I cannot remember when the next meeting is, but it's at some point soon. Anyway, so that's it for that. Next agenda order paper is that we're not going to hold the meeting on the 17th, so everyone gets the night off for that. Good? Yeah? People, no one's listening at this point. Like, what? Yeah, I know. Yeah, we're. It's right on 10 o'clock, so I'll finish in a minute or less. And then our meeting after that, of course, I know we will be talking about the special education review and the second, or was it 4 recommendations? So That's it for now. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Look how fast Diane's hand went.
Need like that system they use in the Olympics for timing swimmers and runners. Diane, and seconded by Sophie. All in favor, show of hands. Any opposed? So carried. Thank you very much, and appreciate everyone taking the extra time tonight, and we'll see you in a month.